My name is Shebli Mikailli. I'm an IP attorney, specialize in patents and also handle open source. So my professional journey began at a law firm, Novak Drews, where I practiced patent prosecution, spent some time there, eventually moved over to another firm called Schwegman, Lumberg, and Wosner, where I was a principal. After some more time, I decided to make a move in-house, move to Snap. The decision was really so that I can kind of focus on a greater area of law, right? Kind of get exposure to new things, and kind of start working. That's where I kind of started working with open source, and kind of expanding on my skill set as an attorney. So as a patent counsel, my day-to-day concerns are primarily managing all aspects of our patent program. So this kind of covers a lot of things. So one, just providing training and education to engineers, answering questions, promoting the patent program overall, explaining to them how they can submit ideas for patenting, things like that. Also working with them kind of just to check in to see what they're working on a regular basis, just to kind of help them flush out patentable ideas, help them submit invention disclosure forms. We also review those invention submissions. We handle all stages of patent prosecution. So working with outside counsel, reviewing drafts, reviewing recommendations, making decisions regarding foreign filing. And also we support other business groups as part of the patent program too. So, if there's support needed for M&A or litigation, things like that. As a patent counsel, I work with open source, in different ways. So, kind of going back to my time at a firm, that's where I first kind of started working with open source. And that primarily kind of rose from just, engineers perhaps like having questions like, hey, we're interested in open sourcing this project, or, we've open sourced some of this code. Can we still patent this? What are the implications of doing that? Also in-house counsel would have questions about open source, the implications, and maybe coming up with a strategy on the best way to patent something in view of that some of the software was provided as open source. In-house, it's much broader range of things I do with open source. It's much more, I think, of, real work with open source. We're reviewing requests that come from engineers to either use open source software in our proprietary code, contribute to existing projects, as well as maybe requesting to create new open source projects based on some proprietary code that they've created. Beyond that, just kind of managing the open source program and updating the procedures and the policies, and just kind of trying to streamline the process, just kind of make sure that everything works better, right? I mean, initially, you got to realize I knew nothing about open source kind of starting out. So, I started with a lot of Googling, but the resources that I found really helpful, one is Heather Meeker. She's a well-known attorney that specializes in open source. She's got a lot of content out there. She has a book, she's got videos, she's written articles. So I found her stuff to be very helpful. She understands open source really well. And she does a really good job of explaining it in a simple way that's easy to understand. Initially, the thing that she's done that I found the most helpful is her YouTube channel. She's got these videos that are really written for like the absolute novice. That, I mean, if you watch those videos, you can kind of go from zero to having a pretty good understanding of open source in about an hour. I've actually watched her videos multiple times. Aside from that, she's done a lot of videos with FOSSA that are on a little bit more specific topics. So whereas the YouTube videos are kind of more about like, hey, here's the different types of licenses, and here's just like an understanding of open source overall. On FOSSA, there's some more specific videos that might be like break down like one specific license. She recently did one on AGPL that was really great. I think transitioning to FOSSA's got these great articles on their website that I read all the time. They also kind of go for more general topics to, they'll have articles on specific open source licenses. And again, I read those all the time just to make sure I'm not missing anything, or when I'm researching something, just to make sure I'm not making any mistakes. They also have other videos that they've done, outside of with Heather Meeker that are really helpful. Beyond that, you can also look at the websites for the major licenses, right? There's great explanations there. They'll have, kind of like a breakdown of the license, an explanation. There's an FAQ page if you have some very specific questions that I find very helpful. And then also just reading the license text is a great place to go, just to familiarize yourself with them. I guess theoretically, all the answers should be in there, although they can be pretty difficult to understand sometimes and decipher. But I usually use like a combination of all those resources to kind of make sure I'm doing everything correctly. The most difficult transition for me with open source was when, I kind of went from being at a firm and, you're just kind of advising people and teaching people about open source, kind of like an academic level, to now you're managing a program, you're making decisions, and, there's a kind of like this high stakes, your mistakes, or, the decisions you make, if you're making a mistake, they can have like real implications, to the company, right? I mean, if you're not complying with a license, it could be bad PR, or it could have some negative effect on the proprietary code. So that was kind of the toughest transition for me, was kind of being thrust in there and having to kind of make these decisions and learn everything kind of on the fly. I overcame them really by using all those resources I mentioned, reading, learning, being very careful with the decisions, and just kind of, being extra careful to make sure that like I was doing everything correctly. Biggest challenge we face is, I think, just making sure that we know what open source is being used and that everyone's kind of doing what they're supposed to be doing. You can educate engineers, you can put do a lot of things like that, explain, have a lot of resources for them on, hey, here's the risk with using certain open source licenses, but it really just takes one person kind of, doing what they want to do, to kind of get past that and create some obligations that, could have some negative impacts on the company. So I think just having visibility into what's being done, the open source usage is the biggest challenge. And then also, I think just being in contact and creating communication with people at the right period of time, in like the product like development kind of process. So, one of the main benefits of using open source is just the speed at which you can develop, right? You have all this access to this free, high quality code. And so you don't want to get to a point where you're kind of reviewing things at the very end, and now you have to like ask them to remediate issues. And you're kind of like, suddenly you've created a time crunch and it's causing them more time. So, you want to make sure that people are educated and using things correctly, that you have visibility into it, but also that you're talking to them at the right point in the process, so that if they did want to use some open source that was, would create some unwanted obligations, that you could talk to them before they've gone too far in the journey, so that they can maybe try to find an alternative or develop some proprietary code instead. The advice I would give to patent attorneys who want to learn more about open source, I think, first off, just kind of start with the fundamentals, understand the benefits of open source and the different ways that open source is used, right? I mean, there's inbound use where you're taking free code and you're using it within your proprietary software. There's outbound use where you're contributing to an existing project, or you're providing some of your code as a new project, and kind of the different types of considerations that you want to make for each, like what the different risks are with each and how you want to kind of approach the request for each. Aside from that, I would recommend that, understand like the concept behind the different types of licenses, or, what gap they filled and why they were kind of written the way they were. I think understanding, why, what it's pretty clear with, I think, with a strong copyleft or a permissive license, but then, understanding where like a weak copyleft or like LGPL comes in and like what gap that filled, or AGPL, understanding those, the why behind that really makes understanding how the licenses work a lot easier, in my opinion. And then the other thing is to, I think, have a clear understanding of the different ways the software can be used within your company, and, the different obligations that might be created under each, right? So, is this something that's like an internal use that you're going to just kind of be using as a standalone tool? Is it, something that you're going to be integrating into your code, but it's not going to be distributed necessarily, like it might be for backend use, or is this something that's going to be distributed? And how, those different use cases would kind of affect the way you're going to make decisions regarding whether open source should be used or which licenses would be okay.